Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network. Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over. Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you'd get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Well, Matt, welcome onto the Australian Finance Podcast today.
Thanks very much. Great to be with you.
Now, we've had a few economists on the podcast before, but you're from a non-finance probably background in terms of where you work right now. You actually work for SEEK.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm SEEK's first economist as well, so they hadn't had one before me. But SEEK, as you'd imagine, has lots of amazing data about the Australian labour market, and they wanted somebody who could come in and play with it and find out interesting things. So that's my job.
If someone hasn't heard about SEEK, because we've mentioned it a few times on different careers podcasts, are you able to give us a 30-second rundown?
Yeah, so SEEK is Australia's number one employment marketplace. So it's where people go to find jobs and where employers go to find staff. We're the number one in Australia. We're also number one in, I think, 11 other countries as well. So mostly in Southeast Asia and East Asia and New Zealand. It's been going for around 25 years, so we recently celebrated our 25th anniversary at SEEK, and yeah, going from strength to strength.
Wonderful. And what does a day in the life look like as an economist at SEEK?
So it's pretty broad ranging because I am a team of one. I guess I have kind of free rein to sort of comb through SEEK's data on the Australian labour market and also look at external data as well to try and figure out what's going on in the labour market. So I sort of have a two-way job. One is to try and inform people within SEEK about what's going on in the labour market. So there I'm particularly drawing on ABS data and the like. But also in doing things like this podcast, in trying to inform people outside SEEK about what's going on in the labour market, and they're drawing much more on SEEK's data.
It's a very topical episode, especially most people listening to this podcast today will be working in some form, whether it's part-time, freelance, full-time capacities. So lots of interesting things to talk about today. But I wanted to kick off because we've recently had a lot of interest rate rises. We're feeling the pressure of cost of living increases. Our coffees at the shop down the road are going up in price. I'd be keen to hear from you, how is this rising cost of living, the increase in inflation impacting the job market, and what does it mean for us?
So the rise in interest rates would normally be expected to make things worse for the jobs market, essentially. Normally when interest rates go up, unemployment follows. So the unemployment rate tends to rise. That hasn't happened yet. We're still kind of at 3.5% unemployment rate, which is the lowest in nearly 50 years.
So
that's good. Unemployment remains really low. It's still pretty easy to get a job if you want one, certainly compared to how it has been in the past. But I think we should be expecting things to turn a little bit. So we should be expecting unemployment to rise and it to become a bit harder for people to find work who are looking for jobs. So certainly over the coming year, the Reserve Bank and others forecast a rise in the unemployment rate. We do know with people struggling with the cost of living, one way that people try and cope with that is to look for new work, because often that's when people get the biggest pay rises, is when they do change jobs. So we see that behaviour as well. We've seen really strong numbers of people going on SEEK and applying for new jobs.
I always find it interesting that it's much easier to get a pay rise by jumping companies than actually getting that pay rise internally.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a range of research that shows that's the case. People who switch jobs do tend to get bigger wage rises than people who stay put. We see it in our data as well. So at the moment, the advertised salaries, so salaries for jobs advertised on SEEK, are growing faster than overall wages and salaries. So it is consistent with that idea that the best way to get a pay rise is to get a new job.
Well, good to keep in mind if someone's thinking about if they go for an internal promotion or jump somewhere else this year.
That's right, yeah. As I say, at the moment, the SEEK advertised salary index is running at 4.7% versus overall wages and salaries at 3.3%. So a pretty decent gap there between the rates of growth in advertised salaries and overall wages and salaries.
How have you seen wage growth change over time? Is it increasing a lot more in the last few years, or has it slowed down?
So before COVID, it had been pretty sluggish for a long time. So it had slowed down after peaking in the end of the mining boom around 2012-13. It started to slow, and it was sort of in the 2.5% to 3% range for much of the past decade. Through COVID, as you'd imagine, it fell quite sharply, so people weren't getting big pay rises in 2020. But it has picked up since. So in the past year, wages grew by 3.3%, as I mentioned. That's the fastest in around a decade. So that's the fastest that we've seen since 2012. Unfortunately, that still lags well behind inflation. So wages growth at 3.3%, but inflation is still up around 7%. So people's real wages, what they can buy after adjusting for inflation, is unfortunately falling.
How do you measure wage growth? Because you hear the term thrown around a lot on the media.
Yeah, so there's two kind of key measures that I've been referring to. One, this 3.3%, that comes from the ABS. They survey the Australian Bureau of Statistics.
Okay,
sorry to slip into jargon there. But yeah, so this is the official statistics agency of the Australian government. They do a survey of employers every quarter, and they use that survey to measure wages growth. So they survey a random sample of employers, and they ask those employers to give them information about a random sample of the people who work for them. The good thing about the Bureau of Stats is that they're able to legally compel people to reply to their surveys.
Really?
So as a result, their surveys have really good response rates. So that's the wage price index, the measure I've been referring to there. And another measure is the SEEK advertised salary index, where we use the salaries in, just as it sounds like, jobs that are advertised on SEEK to give some measure of how fast those are rising.
Okay, so quite a bit of data there going into that.
Yeah, that's right. And for the advertised salary index, even though if you go on SEEK, it's only a minority of jobs that will actually show you what the advertised salary is, we actually have that information in the background for all of those jobs. So we're able to draw on that in putting together that advertised salary index. And there is, give or take 250,000 new job ads every month. And that goes into our advertised salary index.
That's a lot of new jobs. Wow.
It is, yeah. And, it's been pretty consistently strong. So we're still well above pre-COVID levels. There's lots of opportunities out there. As I mentioned before, unemployment's super low. When unemployment's low, there tends to be a lot of job ads. And that's certainly what we've seen over the last few years. But we shouldn't necessarily expect it to stay that way.
So you've talked about the wage growth and increasing over the last few years. Are there any standout industries that have increased a lot faster or maybe decreased a lot faster than others?
Yeah, so none of them are decreasing. We're not seeing wages fall anywhere, but we're certainly seeing wages grow more slowly in some industries. I'd say in general, the real kind of sluggish growth has been in the public sector. So people who work in government, that includes both sort of, office-based public servants, but also people in industries like healthcare and education and training, for example, where there's large public sector components. Their wages growth has been more sluggish than the overall figures. The real kind of standouts have been actually in a few sort of blue collar industries. So manufacturing and wholesale trade, for example, have led the field over the past year or so. We see in SEEK's data some industries like consulting, for example, and the law are pretty sluggish. So they're right down the bottom there. Those kind of white collar professional industries have been growing much more slowly than the overall market.
Is that sort of a representation of how many graduates are going into those fields as well?
It's in part about that, yeah, part about so labour supply, the number of people who's entering those fields. It's also just something about the way the economy's gone in the last couple of years since we kind of got hit with COVID, essentially. The parts of the economy that have boomed the most have been those that supply goods rather than services. So, all sorts of things from household furniture through to clothes, through to whatever, any kind of physical goods, whether it's making them, transporting them, selling them, that has been the kind of booming sector of the economy. And services, particularly your kind of white collar office-based services, they've done all right, but they certainly haven't boomed to anything like the same extent.
Is that sort of an indication of where we've been spending our money as consumers over the past few years?
That's right. And that was particularly true through 2020 and 2021 when we were sort of in and out of lockdowns.
Lots of online shopping.
Yeah, that's right. There was very few opportunities to spend money on services. You know, you couldn't go to restaurants. You couldn't go to whether it's sporting events or, cultural events. You couldn't go to doctors and health professionals and spend on those types of services for at least some of that period. But you could do online shopping. You could get things delivered to your house. You could renovate your house, and people certainly did all of those things. That's starting to unwind now, so we're going back to a more sort of normal pattern of consumption or normal split between goods and services. But certainly over the past couple of years, we've seen really, really strong demand for goods, and that's kind of playing out in the labour market.
Interesting to listen to those cycles sort of playing out as well. And I know we're always interesting to hear a little bit of what's happening in the future. So I was wondering if you had any data to share on maybe over the next decade or so, what maybe Seek or some of the data shows will be some of the highest earning industries around.
Well, normally your best bet about what will be the highest earning industry in the future is what is the highest earning industry today.
Yep.
So in part, I think when we look out over the past, one thing that strikes me is how little some things have changed. So a lot of the jobs that were in biggest demand 25 years ago when Seek started are still the jobs that are in biggest demand today. Okay. So if I was placing a bet on what would be the kind of strongest demand 10 years from now and the highest wages, it would be, well, it'll probably look more or less like it does today. So your sort of high paid medical professionals and so on are likely to remain high paid into the future. I think the big risk or the big kind of unknown factor is about the effect of AI and about new technology and the effect that will have on the labour market. Nobody really knows, and anybody who expresses really great confidence about exactly how this is going to affect the labour market probably shouldn't be listened to. But I think we can have some confidence that it's going to have an effect. I think it'll have the biggest effect on jobs that can be most easily kind of automated, or where you are carrying out some series of kind of repeated steps and it's relatively straightforward to get a machine to do those same steps. Some of those jobs will be highly paid, like radiographers, for example, people who, whose job is to look at x-rays and identify whether people have a particular injury or illness. That is the sort of thing that computers are starting to get pretty good at. And that's a high paid job that I would predict will be less high paid in 10 years. Not saying it'll go away, but it might fall down the rankings a bit.
Yeah, your thoughts echo a conversation I had on the show recently with futurist Steve Sammartino, and he discussed that you should actually be looking at what are some of the things you do in your day-to-day job, and are there repeating tasks that you do, and are there a lot of things on a computer that don't involve talking to other people, and finding ways that potentially even in your current job that you can be more valuable.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, all of us, every job can be broken into different kinds of tasks. Some of those tasks will be more or less kind of able to be automated or replaced with technology, right? Like if you're doing something that involves kind of, looking at a spreadsheet and copying some numbers into another spreadsheet, that type of thing, that type of automated kind of data entry, mundane sort of process is less likely to exist to still be something that's done by you or another human in 10 years' time. But the type of thing we're doing right now, having a direct personal conversation between, human beings, I'm pretty confident that that's going to continue to exist. Similarly, jobs that like physiotherapists or aged care nurses, jobs that involve doing physical things in the real world, are less likely to be affected by technology, at least in the short term.
So you don't think there's going to be robots looking after our grandparents in 10 years' time?
In 10 years' time, I'd be pretty surprised, yeah. Like in 30 plus years' time, who knows? But yeah, over that sort of short to medium term, I think you could be more confident that those types of jobs are safe.
It's fascinating. I was speaking to a friend recently and they were applying for a job online and they actually used ChatGPT to help write their cover letter and they got accepted for the next round of interview, which I thought, I don't know if that's cheating or...
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's cheating necessarily, like if that gets you ahead, you'd want to be confident that whatever ChatGPT is saying is accurate and you're going to be able to kind of back it up in interviews. I think there's going to be more and more automation on both sides of the kind of job hiring process. Like you might be submitting some cover letter that ChatGPT helped you work on, and the recruiter at the other end or the employer at the other end might be using ChatGPT to help them sort through the results. So there's certainly going to be more computers involved in the recruitment process. But ultimately, hiring decisions are still largely, I think, going to be made by people. So ChatGPT might help you get your foot in the door, but you're still going to need to prove yourself at interview. And it's also the case that kind of if everybody's using tools like ChatGPT, then that does sort of level the playing field a bit, and a more personal touch might help you stand out in that situation.
Yeah, I was just interested to know like what employers are asking you and Seek about these emerging technologies and how they can maybe use them for good or weed out people that are using them.
Yeah, so we kind of work with employers to help them find the best people. So certainly with small businesses, they're able to get direct personal advice from a human at Seek to help them, word their job ads in the best way. It is a constant challenge, I guess, to make sure that employers are getting the most high quality and relevant applications. Like it doesn't suit anybody if there's a flood of applications from people who are unlikely to stand a realistic chance at getting a particular job. So that is a challenge, and it's something we put a lot of effort into at Seek, is that sort of search and matching. We want to match the right person to the right job.
Yeah, because in the past, the cover letter was often the way you could show you went the extra mile and didn't just flood every company with your resume.
Yeah, that's right. I think that has probably changed a little bit over time. And, obviously now, like we've been talking about, there are tools like ChatGPT and other large language models that can help you do that. So it's less standout. But also I think we've seen people sort of copy and paste, letters. So it's less of a personal touch. In that sort of environment, personal introductions and kind of connections might become more valuable again. But also more generally, whatever you can do to sort of stand out on your CV as well, accumulating relevant experience and skills, I think is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, and we did an excellent episode a few months back with Shelley Johnson, the author of Sort Your Career Out. So if you're interested in how you can actually add that personal touch and stand out from the crowd, I'd really encourage listeners to go back to that episode. But on the topic of jobs, I think we're changing jobs. Well, it seems anecdotally, at least, the under 40 crowd that I speak to and in our community, we're changing jobs a lot more. And I'd be keen to hear, is that coming through in the data, and maybe what change and impact that has on the workforce?
Yeah, it's a strange one. I hear the same thing, and certainly like from, friends and family, like seem to change jobs more than was the case in the past. Overall, though, it doesn't really come through in the numbers. So we see the Bureau of Statistics, like we were talking about before, they do regular surveys and ask people, did you change jobs in the last 3 months or the last 12 months? Those numbers haven't really done much. So in February, the proportion of workers who had changed jobs in the prior 3 months was about 5%. So 1 in 20 people was a kind of new starter in their job. That's right in line with where it's been for around a decade, and is actually lower than it had been earlier in, say, the 1990s. So the proportion of people who change jobs in any given kind of quarter or year has fallen a little bit over the long term and remained sort of static in the last decade. What we have seen is a rise in part-time work, particularly through the 90s. Part-time and casual work rose a lot, and it's stayed high since then. And people in part-time and certainly casual jobs do tend to stay in those jobs a bit less than people in full-time kind of permanent jobs. Yeah,
it's interesting because when we think about our parents' generation, they might have worked in 10 different roles, but it was in the same company and they just stayed there for life. And it feels like when you speak to your friends, by the age of 30, we've worked in 5 different companies.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's definitely more, when people change jobs now, they're more likely to have a bigger change, whether it's changing industries or certainly changing employers. So people have more sort of general skills that are transportable across employers and across industries, whereas people in the past, when industries like, say, manufacturing were a bigger part of the labour market, you'd accumulate many more skills that were kind of specific to particular employers. So people did tend to stay put a bit more in those sort of roles.
Yeah, I'm also interested in some of the biggest changes to the way we work, because I know you recently published a special report looking at some of these factors, and maybe if you could chat about some of the most interesting ones to you personally about how the way that we work and live our lives day to day has changed.
Yeah, so I think the number one that stands out to me is a pretty new one, and it's the work from home trend. So before COVID, it's not that long ago, but before COVID, it was pretty rare that people worked from home on a kind of regular basis, and certainly more than for a day here or there. Whereas now it's really widespread, and it's been the number one search term on Seek for basically since COVID.
So people are looking for jobs where they can work from home or have the option.
Exactly, yeah. So people used to go on Seek, well, they still do, but it used to be that the top ranking search terms were things like admin job or retail job, and now it's work from home.
Really?
People just are most interested in that ability to work from home. So people really value that. Employers, I think, have recognized that. So the proportion of job ads that say you can work from home has also risen really sharply. So that, I think, is the number one trend that really stands out, and it's sort of come out of nowhere. More generally, I think, say if we compare now to 25 years ago when Seek started, certainly technology is much more integrated into our working lives than it was then. That's obviously true of sort of office workers. We use technology basically our whole working day, which might not have been true 25 years ago, but also a range of other jobs. Like if you're working in a shop, you're using kind of point of sale equipment that didn't exist 25 years ago. If you're driving a truck, you're using GPS equipment that didn't exist 25 years ago. Technology has become more embedded in and integrated into our working lives than it was before. We're working longer, so average retirement ages have gone up. The kind of gender split has changed, so there's more women in the workforce than there was 25 years ago. And thankfully, the gender pay gap has fallen a little bit as well. I'd say we've seen a greater emphasis on what we might call soft skills, meaning sort of interpersonal skills and things like that.
So the things like teamwork and communication. Exactly,
that ability to work well with others, essentially, rather than doing kind of specific technical tasks. Like that's obviously still important, but the sort of softer skills, I don't really love that term, but that's how it's not usually described. Those sort of interpersonal skills have really risen in importance over the past few decades.
Yeah, it's interesting. They used to write soft skills and hard skills on job ads you saw online, and it's quite interesting that often it's those, well, I don't know, those interpersonal skills, as you said, that are more important, because you can learn a lot of those expertise areas on the job, but it's those things like the willingness to learn and communication and responsibility that really help you the most. Yeah,
that's right. And like, to be honest, I think that's it's been sort of gendered. Like to speak in broad stereotypes, at least in the past, it was thought that, women did more of the soft skills type jobs and men did more of the kind of technical hard skills jobs. Again, I don't like that terminology. That has changed, and I just think there is a greater recognition that across a really broad range of jobs, that ability to work well with others and to communicate well with clients and other stakeholders is super important. There's very few jobs where that isn't important. And in many cases, it's at least as important as your kind of technical skills in whatever your area of work is.
Are you seeing some of that come through from employers in the jobs they put online? Some of those words like the teamwork and communication just come through all the time?
Yeah, that's right. So the proportion of job ads that include keywords around those things has risen over time. So absolutely, employers are placing a greater priority on that.
Interesting. And I know you mentioned the work from home trend. It's interesting, a few years ago, most of my jobs or my friends' jobs, they would never have been able to be working from home. Like the employer would never have thought that was an option, and suddenly we all adapted.
Yeah, that's right. And things don't usually happen that way. So it's very rare that we have such a big kind of change to our working lives happen virtually overnight, as it did with COVID. Obviously kind of unusual circumstances, but it really seems to have stuck. So we haven't seen the proportion of job ads that say you can work from home start to go down over the last year as life has more or less gone back to normal across Australia. That really does seem like it's here to stay.
Are there any other key search terms you see coming through that really demonstrate what Australians are looking for in jobs right now?
Yeah, so not necessarily search terms, but we certainly see some patterns in kind of which jobs get the most applications, I guess. One is salary, pretty obviously. So particularly with the kind of cost of living crunch that's on, people are interested in increasing their salary. So what we see is that job ads that include a visible salary, so salary that is shown to the job seeker, those attract more applications than other job ads, particularly where the salary is attractive. So just as you'd expect.
And
so,
it's not a guessing game.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's one key trend. People also seem to like perks, as you would expect.
Yeah.
So any kind of job ads that mention employee benefits, whether it's discounts on goods or services, discounts on health insurance, things like that seems to be pretty attractive. And what we hear through our kind of research in speaking to job seekers is that people also place an increasing emphasis on the values of employers that they're considering. So they want to know that employers share their values, whether it comes to sustainability or work-life balance or all sorts of things. That seems to be an increasing area that people are looking out for when they're applying for new jobs.
I like that that's coming through because we spend so much time at our day job and with those people. So you want to make sure it's a really good fit for you and your life and your views.
Yeah, that's right. And it suits employers as well to get a good match. An employer doesn't want somebody who's going to be uncomfortable or feel as if the workplace isn't the right place for them. It suits both sides to have a good match from the outset. So I think employers being more upfront about the type of workplace that they are and what they value as an employer, I think can really help them too.
Are you seeing less of an emphasis on things like tertiary qualifications? Because I know there's been a lot of debate on that you could do this job just as well by learning on the job or learning some different skills through other types of online learning before you jump in, rather than you have to get this degree.
Yeah, I'm not sure about tertiary qualifications specifically, but we have seen a rise in the proportion of job ads that say no experience necessary.
Okay.
So that phrase in particular has gone up. Part of that might just be that it's a really hot labour market. So unemployment, as we talked about, is the lowest in around 50 years. So the demand for workers is really high. You'd expect in a period like this, when demand for workers is really high, that employers would be more willing to consider people who might have less experience or lower qualifications than they would otherwise have required. So we've seen that at different points in the past as well. When unemployment is low, employers are more likely to give people a go who would otherwise not have got a look in.
Yeah, the current economic circumstances are forcing them to be a bit more flexible.
Yeah, that's right. At least while things stay good. So, I mean, that's of benefit to, it's not just about qualifications, but also like, say, people with a disability tend to fare better when unemployment is lower. People who've been in prison tend to fare better when unemployment is lower. People with a whole range of kind of disadvantages get more of a look in, that employers are more likely to consider them than they would in a different market where workers are easier to find.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there's quite a few other flow-on benefits of this current labour market.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, low unemployment like this tends to disproportionately benefit disadvantaged groups, like I've just mentioned, but also young people, broadly defined. So when times are good in the labour market, as they have been, youth unemployment tends to fall even faster than unemployment for older people. So younger people do sort of benefit disproportionately from a strong labour market like the one we've got at the moment.
Oh, very positive things for listeners, especially if they're considering applying for their first job out of uni or changing careers in the next 12 months. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, we have seen sort of job ads start to come off a little bit in the last year or so, but they're still well above pre-COVID levels. So there's still a lot of opportunities out there for anybody who's considering looking for a new job.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, before we wrap up today's conversation, if I had to get you to take out your crystal ball and talk about some of the biggest trends shaping the future of work over the next few years, what would you say?
Yeah, so number one, I'd say AI and other technology. So as we've talked about before, this question about which tasks and jobs can be replaced by technology, I think is the number one question over the 10 years ahead. Another is the aging society. So we know that on average, we're all getting older every day, but Australia on average is getting older. That's going to mean more demand for workers in healthcare, more demand for workers in aged care as well. That's really going to shape the future of the workforce. So, if you're looking for a secure job, a job in one of those industries is likely to be the most secure going forward.
Wonderful. Well, I know Seek have a lot of resources for if anyone's looking at trying to find a new job this year or wants help with cover letters and resumes, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. So, your best port of call if you're looking for a new job is absolutely seek.com.au.
Wonderful. Matt, well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.